Tell him about the time we faced.
All right. Well, as I remember.
At Avenger headquarters.
Because united, the Avengers are strong.
Welcome to the Marvel Evolution Show with myself, Andy Stead.
And I'm Jarian Gibson.
And I'm Alex Stroud.
And we have once again got back our Marvel professor, Martin Flanagan. How you doing, Martin?
I'm good, thanks. Hi, chaps. Really good to be here again.
Yeah, it's always great to have you on, Martin. And you're, I think we've said to you in the past, you're one of our favourite guests, but you're also one of our listeners' favourite guests as well. They just like listening to you. So
That's great.
It's a pleasure to have you back on.
Well, a lecturer does like to be listened to, so.
I guess so. I think there's probably a way that you've got of speaking that people just want to listen.
Maybe
we had Sean Martinborough on last week.
Yeah, I saw.
Yeah, and he was just another person who we didn't really do much talking, did we, guys? We just sort of sat there listening, and there was no questions coming in because everyone was just listening, and it was I think that says something to your ability of being able to talk and present what you're talking
about. I thought Sean was great and had some really interesting insights, and very much enjoyed listening to him. I still can't seem to get in the frame here, so apologies to people who've seen half of my face. But yeah, no, it was that was a good show, and no, I'm really happy to be back, and there's so much water flows under the bridge, so much MCU water flows under the bridge every time we talk that you can. 4 months of not being on creates so much kind of creativity gone on. So,
yeah, exactly. And I guess the manner of that creativity, what we've seen, was why what I suggested to the guys. I said, like, let's get Martin back on to just go further in depth into this idea of the genre within a genre, because what we've seen over the last sort of 4 or 5 months. We've seen Miss Marvel, this sort of coming of age story. We've seen She-Hulk, which is this sort of sitcom. We've seen Werewolf by Night that goes back to these kind of grindhouse, horror movies. We've seen Moon Knight, which was a psychological thriller. And I just said to the guys, like, let's get Martin back on and really explore this subgenre idea, and look at it just a little bit more in depth. Like, let's just say, let's focus on that one element and see what could happen. Where could it go in the MCU, and how are they kind of taking inspiration from these other genres of other types of TV shows, and does that reflect in the comics and just this whole idea? Yeah. So
yeah, that's fine. I mean, I've been thinking about sort of where the Marvel Studios kind of attitude to genre may have come from. I've been sort of looking back in our book, and kind of there's a lot to say, I think, about the beginnings of that. So in the book we kind of look at the journey from Iron Man to roughly Guardians in terms of genre, because the book does go after that. So basically the book came out in 2016, and I suppose the last big release that we were able to look at in a bit of depth was Ant-Man, which is now a long time ago. So it's sort of, people might think the book is kind of stayed a bit static, but actually there was an awful lot that happened during that time. And in our chapter on genre, so the book's called The Marvel Studios Phenomenon. I wrote it with Mike McKenney and Andy Livingston, who I'm sure I can get onto the show at some point if you can trick them with the right topic. So we were talking about, in that chapter on genre, it was about sort of how Marvel needed to set itself up in a certain way with Iron Man, and used genre almost at the beginning as people need to remember that Marvel Studios was an independent for a little while before Disney bought it. It's a real independent. We don't think of it as from the indie world, but it was a kind of a tyro company, an upstart. And because it was an upstart in Hollywood, I think they needed to think about genre really carefully for those first few films, because they needed to sort of some Hollywood cred, and to sort of seem like they were working as a film studio works rather than a kind of a publisher. And I think that lasted until about Guardians of the Galaxy time, and we're way on now, and the kind of attitude to genre is a lot wilder and a lot looser, and people are a lot more accepting of things. I do still think it kind of harks back to that kind of, that kind of care and attention with those first few films. And I think, Guardians, having reread our chapter today, that Guardians really strikes me as the film where Marvel started to be really confident with, throwing a lot of different things up in the air with genres. But just think of the kind of the Peter Quill, the 80s references, the kind of the way the movie goes from the prologue, which is this dark, depressing thing in a hospital, with a cancer kind of patient, to Quill running outside and being greeted with a kind of Spielbergian godlike spaceship. And then there's the reassuring Marvel Studios branding. And then he's dancing through he's dancing through Morag. So it's like, because there was a new confidence, I think, with Guardians. But yeah, there's an awful lot to say about what's going on now, definitely.
Yeah. And I think, we have seen, I think they've taken more risks in regards to the genre, or not even the genres, but how far they've lent into the different genres. I think Moon Knight was probably that first, from my perspective. I don't know about other people, but I thought Moon Knight was that first real lean into something different.
Yep.
It didn't, and I don't mean that just because it didn't have those connections to the MCU that other shows and projects have had, but just the style of it. It was asking different questions, weren't it, than other superhero projects at the time, and even now.
Mm.
Do you feel like shows can have multiple genres? Like, do you think that that's something where, you can have almost like a subgenre and another subgenre that are really kind of taking place at the same time?
Yeah, I do think I compare it to, sometimes I think of it in terms of tone and not genre, but I compare it to the comic Marvel universe. And when reading that growing up, but I still think today, actually, where you'll still have a Howard the Duck kicking around at the same time as a kind of a Winter Soldier or some kind of noiry kind of, the kind of thing that Sean works on, actually, like a kind of noiry crime thing. In the Marvel universe, I always felt like it was possible that somebody could come from fighting Dracula to fighting, some idiot with a mad robot, with a giant robot kind of thing. And there was just that, like, you step into the pages of a different comic and that feel changes. I think they can just about do that in TV shows and films. I think if you do it too much in the context of one film, I think it can get a little messy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in the TV shows, I think they're starting to be really brave now. And we'll probably come back, I'm sure, to talk about She-Hulk. But, my jaw was dropping at the end of She-Hulk with kind of some of the, just the wild stuff that was going on in that last episode. I mean, I wasn't really prepared for that. I haven't really, don't follow the news like you guys, and I haven't seen the rumors or anything. And I kind of thought that, events would be tied up in a reasonably, reliable bow, and was not expecting that. So we can maybe come back and talk about that. But I do think it's possible, Alex. I mean, I think the shows are being conceived as a bit like that now, and I think when the benefit is having that kind of feedback from audiences that will say, the producers can say to each other and the filmmakers can sort of say, well, we know they know what Asgard is, say.
Mm-hmm.
So we can take an Asgardian and put them into lots of different contexts. We had an Asgardian in She-Hulk, of course. We had a few, actually. Or we had some people who stole Asgardian tech, I suppose, one Asgardian. And, people can go, I sort of understand what that means. So, I know how an Asgardian might behave in a kind of a relatively realistic California, just as what we've seen Jane Foster go to Asgard, kind of thing. So I think there's that kind of element to it. And I think the shows are being pitched like that. Cause I mean, it must be competitive. I mean, I have no kind of insiders at Marvel Studios in terms of how writing happens and how things get commissioned. But I would imagine that it's competitive and people will be going, Moon Knight got kind of kicked up a certain number of steps on the ladder to get into production, but there'll be things that are sort of fighting out a bit lower than that, a few levels lower than that some writers and some producers would love to get made. The kind of things that you guys probably are expecting more than me, because you've got such a good kind of ear to the ground on the news. But to kind of distinguish those from each other, I actually think they do need to do Moon Knight treatment sometimes and kind of go, this is it's almost like a spy thing with an Egyptian, a country crossing James Bond thing with an Egyptian feel, or a Muslim coming of age, historical, the Miss Marvel kind of deep dive into history and partition was, again, very unexpected for me anyway. So I think they are conscious of that, and I think they know they can do it a little bit. Yeah.
From the chat comments here, someone goes, WandaVision and Werewolf by Night were a masterpiece.
Have you seen Werewolf by Night, mine?
Yeah, I've just seen it this weekend, and I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and that's without a huge history with the Marvel horror characters. I mean, I had a few British black and white reprint comics called Legion of Monsters, which featured Dracula and Get a Werewolf by Night and things like that. I actually think Moon Knight might have been in the pages of that comic.
Probably was.
Weirdly appropriately, yeah. But I really enjoyed it, and I love. I guess we can do spoilers about Werewolf by Night now, can't we?
Yes. Yep.
So I loved the kind of relative twist of he was there to save Ted.
Yep.
I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I'd seen some leaks about Man-Thing being in it, but I thought that was brilliant. And yeah, it was just great. It was interesting that you kind of framed it as a grindhouse text, because it is, isn't it, at the level of violence, but it's like a universal horror text in its kind of wrapping, in the style, the credits, particularly the choice to do black and white, which is 40 years before Grindhouse. So, you could never get that level of violence in a universal horror film. First of all, it would never get past the censor, never get released. And you would never get a Grindhouse film having that sort of classic feel. So even there, they've mashed things together,
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I felt that he, all the small details, I mean, they couldn't have lent more into a genre on that one than or a different style than if they tried any harder. They even had the grain on the movie and the cigarette burn,
really lovely, yeah.
All of those kind of small details.
Yeah, I just kept on imagining the producer, the production team kind of saying to people, you need to find me the people who can do the credit sequences that look exactly like, like 1939 film that would have had Frederick March in or something. And they got all that stuff kind of completely perfect. And then you have to remind yourself that level of violence doesn't belong in those types of films. I mean, it was always either off screen or it was, in an early 30s Universal film, it was either always off screen or was suggested. And of course, they don't need to do that in a 2022 streaming program that is in theory only accessible to adults. So they can kind of really go to town with it, but sort of quite quaint still in a way that Man-Thing's power is that kind of soul. But I always think of it as like a soul burn kind of thing, but that kind of burning thing, which was actually the least violent thing. Dying, really, isn't it? You'd probably choose it if you had the choice of all those deaths in that show. But I thought it was great, and absolutely loved the coda, the kind of quiet comedy of the coda with them sitting outside and Somewhere Over the Rainbow playing, which again locates it in the 30s or locates the sort of stylistic references to the 30s and classical Hollywood. And I mean, my wife said, he's just so charming, Gael Garcia, isn't he? And I mean, he is, but I mean, it was a really well conceived thing, and I'd actually recommend that to people who've got virtually no knowledge of MCU, to be honest.
And that was Michael Giacchino's first time behind the director's chair too. He was usually composer for Marvel, so he did a fantastic job.
I think I'd seen that written somewhere and then forgotten it, and then it came as a shock when the credit came up, and I was racking my brains trying to think of other composers that have made that move, and I think I came up with one. I've forgotten who it was now, but it's. If you think about it, composers spend an awful lot of time looking at the film track.
Mm-hmm.
They have to understand exactly where everything goes. They have to understand the rhythm, particularly of what's already been kind of put together. And it's surprising that more composers don't do it, but it was absolutely superb. I mean, hats off to him.
I was saying when we done our Werewolf by Night review episode, that the whole thing felt quite musical. It had a rhythm to it. I think you said it, but you just said there about the composer has to get into the rhythm of them.
And
Yeah,
he got so excited he pulled his cord out.
Yeah, it had you said it had a rhythm to it, and that they have to get into rhythm. And I think he found that in the director's chair as well as, you know what I mean, when he was what the scenes that he was playing out, it flowed beautifully.
I mean, I wondered if a friend of mine started watching it and then said he gave up because he wanted to go and watch Ed Wood, which I kind of understood, you know, how it would get you in the same frame of mind. But I do wonder if Giacchino might have a particular liking for, you know, that kind of era of horror. And so therefore he was bringing a lot of genre knowledge and genre history to the table. And so he kind of maybe could visualize it, you know, and this is why they went with him on the project, because, you know, he'd obviously, maybe it was a bit of a reward for having done some high profile scores. But I wonder if he kind of said, look, I already know what this should sound like. And I know this period of film really well. And I also know what it should look like, and kind of picked it that way. But, you know, he certainly did a very good job.
Yeah, I hope we see him again and they do any more of those horror type stuff outside of Blade. You know, even though I would say, you know, I would mind him doing Blade, but if they do like Dracula special, if they do mummies, you know, zombies, Frankensteins, any of the monsters we saw on the wall, even the Man Thing one that's rumored, I would love to see him do more on that side of Marvel.
Anything classic. I mean, as a new director hasn't been appointed for Blade, has it? I think some names are in the.
Yeah, there's one. There's one that's coming down to it that's rumored to be, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. So
yeah, so I mean, you know, I know that the prep on Wheel by Night would have taken place a long time. You're guessing a long time before they, you know, changed direction with Blade. But I mean, it would be a pretty good kind of calling card for that, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But he also come out and said that he's not interested in doing Blade though. So I wonder what else they have in store for him. Maybe he's working on something else already.
The Blade timeline now, even though it's been pushed back, would be fairly intense. You would think, wouldn't it, if someone taking the project on. So you also don't know what, you know, he can probably afford to have more composing gigs stacked up than directors can have directing gigs stacked up. So he might have 4 films to score before, you know, he can do another directing work.
From the chat here, I love the classic monster movie aesthetic. I wish we had more episodes. I look forward to more from special presentations to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
sure.
It worked really well in our format because they'd picked the hunt, and, you know, the kind of horror movie trope of the people who gather at the strange house on a hunt where there's then a twist. There's a great British movie called The Beast Must Die, I think it's a Hammer film, which is exactly that. And everybody knows about like that kind of most dangerous game trope. And I think that was perfect. That wouldn't have worked as episodes. So I can see why this was a special presentation, but you could see, especially the kind of Jack and Man Thing kind of friendship, getting more episodes. I also thought Elsa Bloodstone was great, by the way.
Yes.
Great bit of casting.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, she was excellent. So we had a conversation, or so somebody brought up on one of our posts the other day about the fact that Marvel, they couldn't just keep doing the same thing. You know, I mean, they could have done, but eventually we would have got bored of it, which is why they didn't. And then, you know, we started seeing, like we said, the Moon Knights, and then we started seeing the Miss Marvels. And, you know, we've touched on it just there, so we might as well get stuck into it. But about She-Hulk, you know, they didn't want to finish She-Hulk in the same old way. You know, Jen even says that. And I think that, you know, but how far can they go, do you think? I mean, before we get stuck into talking about She-Hulk, how far can they go before it becomes, what's the word I'm looking for?
Stagnant, stale?
No.
Overkill?
Yes. The opposite. Yeah, the opposite. So how different can they get before people go, hold on a moment, like, this is still a superhero movie, you know, or this is still a Marvel movie.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
You see what I mean now, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like overkill is they are different problems, aren't they? But I think the staleness problem was a real threat as well. So I think even in the book which is going back quite a few years in terms of when we wrote it, you know, we noted that the kind of home genre, it seems to me, this is controversial. A lot of my students don't agree, but I don't really think that superhero is a genre. And I think that superhero films, just like a lot of science fiction and kind of films with people with powers or sort of amazing abilities, are kind of, they sit within the action adventure genre. And the thing about action movies as a template is that they're very abstract. You know, they're kind of, especially the way that modern Hollywood has done them. They're kind of they're limited and they're quite fixed and repetitive, and that's why we get really excited when a Mad Max Fury Road comes along and it isn't just another Fast and the Furious. So like there's that kind of inbuilt repetitiveness. Sorry if people love Fast and Furious. I mean, I like Fast and Furious too.
No, I get it. What you're saying though. That's why I thought it was
Really-
hilarious.
Yeah, it's good to see the kind of it's good to see, you know, there's a thing in film studies about genre and how the system works, how the Hollywood system and the film industry system uses genre, and it has to kind of keep difference and repetition in check. So you can't just have pure repetition because then things get stale. And if things were just different all the time, exactly what you just said, Andy, people would fail to recognize, you know, the kind of the intended genre, and they wouldn't go, oh, I like examples of this film, therefore I'll buy it. So that's always a concern, that difference in repetition. But I you know, going back to what I was saying about action adventure, it's a very abstract kind of narrative canvas to allow for set pieces, and the set pieces are like the ritual, you know, things, the things that we all love, you know, the car chases in Fast and Furious, or the kind of the fights in Bond. So those are the things that we all love, but they are very kind of fixed and ritualized, and those things need to be shaken up every now and again. And we were already getting to the point, remember, in the run into the end of the kind of Infinity Saga, where people were complaining about, you know, sick of origin stories, and people were complaining about Marvel villains and saying, you know, they were always the same or they were weak. And so,
Or one and done.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All good characters were, or like the studio didn't realize when it had a good character, so it kind of killed it off too quickly. And you know, Ronan is such a classic example there. So there was kind of already that threat. So I actually do think they started to think about that, and I think that, you know, that's why we're looking at Kang now. You know, I think, you know, Kang is literally a variant. So obviously there's kind of, or you know, the Kang we've seen already is a variant. So you've obviously got the idea of difference is built into, you know, sort of against repetition. But in the Infinity Saga, there was no kind of comparable way of introducing Thanos. We got, you know, Thanos was introduced like a fairly typical big bad, except it was over a number of films. It was like Blofeld in James Bond. You'd get like a bit of a little teaser at the end. Whereas Kang has had a kind of a, you know, half an hour of monologuing, you know, already. And so he's going to be really deep. So I think that they've kind of grasped that. And I think that probably explains what the current phase, which I do confess I start to forget the numbers of the phases. The current phase is a lot less bounded. And I think that's making it a little bit messy for some people. But I think that may be the people who can't kind of immerse themselves in the TV shows alongside the movies. Because I think if you're not putting the time in, this is not to be judgmental about other types of fans at all, but I think you are really missing something now. If you're not doing the TV shows alongside movies, you're missing something. I think people who are waiting for 3 movies a year of 2 hours in length are kind of finding things a bit messy, whereas people who are kind of kicking back with TV shows kind of going, you know, this is exactly what I want, you know. So
Yeah,
Just wait until next year when we start getting 4 movies a year.
yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, it's been brought up on your page, hasn't it? You know, the thing about is there too much has been brought up on your page, and I do think quality is a factor. I mean, it's just not possible to, you know, that they're humans using proven industrial systems making these things. It's not possible for everything to be a complete home run, but I do think there are ways of engaging with the MCU that kind of make it seem fresher, or at least make it seem more coherent, and some ways that make it seem less. But to answer your original question, Andy, I'm not sure how much wilder it can get. I feel like, you know, the end of She-Hulk kind of, you know, the thing I've got written down here is where will Deadpool go from here?
yeah, exactly.
I mean, once you've got a character punching the tile on Disney Plus out, crawling out of it, and then climbing into the kind of the supposedly non-fiction tile, to go and confront the writers. It's interestingly enough, things like sitcoms have done that in the past. So Gary Shandling, the Gary Shandling, Larry Sanders thing. You sort of had all that backstage stuff, and other movies have done it. Backstage was this kind of conventional, almost like a conventional thing for musicals in the 30s. But the way it was done at the end of She-Hulk did make me think, wow, this is a new level of meta. And it almost made me wish that maybe some of the casual MCU fans weren't watching it. 'Cause I thought it might enrage them. Whereas I was absolutely lapping it up.
Yeah, I think as were a lot of us. Just before we get further into She-Hulk, guys, just two things that I wanted to bring up there. And the first was on this idea that they don't have to be, and Jarian said this years ago about the timings of the episode length, but they can really be flexible with first of all, what type of project it is. So whether it's a movie, whether it's a special presentation, whether it's a series, then they can, within that, obviously you can have different length movies and different styles of movies. Special presentations, you could do them in a style, like we've seen with Werewolf by Night. It could just be a very, very short movie. And then with the series, we could have 6 episodes of 45 minutes. We could have 9 episodes of 23 minutes. We could have, you see what I'm saying? We could have the different length and different styles of shows. So they don't have to be bound by those kind of strict 42-minute times anymore that they had to be, when it was
That's
on
right.
television.
Yeah, I think somebody in the group brought up WandaVision. I mean, I think, WandaVision has maybe changed the game a little bit there because, first of all, it was a show where it was a different genre every week for the first 6, 7 episodes. So different genre of comedy, admittedly, but it was like a different subgenre of comedy. And secondly, because it kind of messed around with things so much, it was a real statement of, Disney Plus is the place for this kind of thing. And now I think that might have forced some of the writers on some of the other things. I know there are kind of shared writers on, that they're definitely having big writers' room meetings between things like WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness. I think that might almost have pushed some of the writers on some of the feature films into a kind of anything goes direction that actually some regular moviegoers might struggle with a little bit. And again, that is maybe where the benefit comes from, putting all the hours in, watching all the shows to kind of really feel like you're getting the vibe of how this is all playing out. And I think if you only watch 6 hours a year of it, it's going to be tricky. And actually, anecdotally, I would say that's what I'm getting from people who have kind of gone, I don't really watch the Disney Plus shows.
Yeah, and that actually led perfectly on to the second point that I wanted to make. And it's a point that I made 2 days ago on Sunday's show about something or other, when I said that the sequel, so where are we at the moment? We've got Wakanda Forever coming up, haven't we? So the sequel to She-Hulk is Wakanda Forever. And the sequel to Wakanda Forever will be the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. And the sequel to that will be Ant-Man Quantumania. So it's not, you're watching the Marvel rather than watching Captain America, for example.
Yes.
So as you say, those people that just can only do theatre, and again, it's not trying to be judgmental, but those people who only want to watch the movies in theatre at the cinema, they're going to miss a big chunk of information out because they're not watching this other stuff.
Yeah, just think about if you're going to Quantumania and you haven't seen Loki.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
why would a sort of fairly casual fan think about going to watch Loki before they've watched Ant-Man?
I feel like with a lot of Marvel stuff, like they overlap now with the MCU. So there's a lot of overlap, and there's not really like a clear distinction on how much of an overlap there is before watching these programs. So you can go in and get a reference to something and never see it coming and not expect it,
Yeah, I mean, put it this way: there's a reason why all those reporting websites, the Bleeding Cool's of this world, devote so many web pages to who comes from which comic and how to understand this reference in Doctor Strange, because a lot of people are not watching those things. I mean, obviously Disney Plus got great numbers, or we assume it has, but the I suppose what I'm saying is the model does not depend on everybody watching everything. I think Disney/Marvel would love everybody to watch everything, but I don't think it requires it. And that's why I don't lose any, I'm a Marvel fan as well as an academic trying to stand back from this. So I want this to continue. and I'm not worried about it kind of hitting the rock because, say, one film underperforms like Eternals, because I think it is a bit like Andy just said. It's like, here's your latest episode of Marvel, and I think if they can get enough people, it won't be everyone. If they can get enough people to have a watching behavior that's like that, where it's like, yes, it's another episode of Marvel, I'm going to watch it. It supports that kind of through subscription, money, and through theatre tickets, because they don't, notice they haven't released for the exclusivity of Disney Plus, they haven't released, say, a DVD of Loki, which is less than 3 hours as a story. So, you could put Loki out as 2.5-hour DVD, Blu-ray, or just digital release, and people who don't have Disney Plus could access it if you cared that much about them knowing who Kang was.
Yeah.
So instead of that, they'll use 10 minutes in Quantum Mania to kind of fill us in on, not only Kang, but I'm guessing they'll fill us in on what variants are in Quantum Mania. Fill us in again because we've seen it, but fill the general audience in. The other point about that is that the people just watching or just loyal to the movies, and again, no judgment at all, because a lot of people don't read comics either, and there is definitely a whole separate Marvel fan base of people who go, if anything, I'd like to have to worry about comic reading less. Please don't make me have to find out about the comics. And that's fine. They can do that. That's fine. But that kind of mass audience is they're watching, Doctor Strange one month, and then the highlight for them the next month is the Batman. And then the highlight for them the month after that might be a Bond film, and then it might be a Fast and the Furious. So like, that's kind of, they're not expecting continuity there. They're expecting, that's where genre comes in. They're kind of going, oh yeah, I know how a Bond film works. Interesting that the last Bond film ended with something we've never seen before in a Bond film, but the overall point stands. And they're quite reliant on genre. I think to go back to Alex's earlier point, I think the people who are real completists are getting rewarded for that by kind of going, the producers kind of going, we know that you can take this boundless stuff, and so we'll play around a bit more. And it won't work every single time. There's definitely going to be shows that fail. I think Marvel Studios already had a pretty good handle on things when it made Inhumans, for instance, and it kind of got that wrong. But well, I think there's a decent amount of respect for the audience with TV shows.
Well, Inhumans wasn't Marvel Studios though; that was Marvel Television. So it was a different, it was a different division, and so there's some variance there. From the chat,
there was tension, wasn't there, at the top with Feige and Loeb? Yeah.
From the chat here, so many countries don't have access to Disney Plus, so it almost can't be required viewing. Which goes back to your point, where maybe they release things on DVD or other media or other platforms, and that's where, like Miss Marvel, for example, I believe it was Pakistan, where they actually had 2 episodes a week in the movie theaters. In the cinema, they showed it because Disney Plus is not there. So they can.
That's so clever. I think that's so clever. I mean, I would love to go and watch. My favorite of the shows is still Loki, and I would love to watch Loki in a cinema.
Some of the expanses and the landscapes there would have lent themselves beautifully. When the one where him and Sylvia sitting looking at the planet sort of destroying itself, that would have been
the purple background.
The visuals, yes.
Yeah, can you imagine how good that would have been on an IMAX screen? It would have looked incredible.
And I mean, this is someone who went seeing Humans in IMAX. So I mean, I went first day with Mike, actually, who's a co-author on the book,
right?
Because they'd planned it as a movie, hadn't they? That it had got kind of retooled and kind of became TV. And so to promote it in Britain, they gave it. I think they did in the States as well.
They did.
Very, very limited release. Maybe even just to keep the kind of tradition of film releases going. And we went to IMAX and we really came out quite disappointed. But I mean, go to see Miss Marvel or something. You could make a really good. Maybe even cutting them down a little, but you could make a good Moon Knight movie. So it does make sense. But yeah, this is something we have to remember. Not everybody has Disney Plus, not only through where they live, but also through their economic means. I mean, some people know how to find things anywhere on the internet. Some people don't. Some people don't do that for moral reasons. So Marvel can't depend on that. But I think they think that everyone will come over to Disney Plus.
Do you think we'll ever get to the point? So it was brought up in our group. In fact, I'll read it out just because it is a good comment. and it's worth reading out. In fairness, if I can find it now, I'm not gonna be able to find the blooming comment now. Oh no, oh no, there we go. I've found. No, I haven't. One more time. Here we go. Got it. So, so this was watching all the different shows, yeah, and then maybe not liking one show and liking another or and things like that. I compare it to buying comic. I've been collecting comic books for over 30 years, and I've never bought every single issue that Marvel or DC or any other company has put out every month. Unless you're rich or work in a comic book store, no one does. You pick and choose what books interest you the most. Some will never be for you, as people have different likes and interests. As the MCU has evolved into a multiverse of stories and is so successful that it can make stars out of previously cult characters like Groot or Man-Thing or Shang-Chi, it also has evolved from generic superhero stories that are all somewhat the same. They are going to take chances and try new stuff, and not everything is going to be for you or anyone. And that is fine. That is how it should be. Just move on to the next project. The MCU is not dying. It is finally growing up.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I agree with all of it, maybe except for using the metaphor of growing up, simply because I teach around comics now as well as films, and that kind of gets used a lot. And I think it can be a bit fallacious because, it's kind of like that often heard thing, Watchmen shows the comic coming of age kind of thing, and I think that's always a bit of a backhanded compliment because it sort of suggests that comics are stupid and juvenile to begin with.
Okay.
But I don't think that's what the commentary is suggesting. I think that's dead right, and I think that again, it's that kind of it's, and maybe it is a bit unfair in that it's parceled out differently for you if you have access to Disney Plus and if you don't. But I think I go back to that thing you said earlier. That this is I want to watch the latest episode of Marvel. It's I wrote down earlier when going through the book. There's never been a studio. Marvel Studios is not a studio in the sense that Warner Brothers is. I think if it had stayed independent and had the success it had with Disney on its own, it maybe could have become that, and then we would have been able to call Marvel Studios genuinely a kind of top, big five Hollywood studio. And that's one of the contentions of our book, was that the way it operated at the beginning was very much like a classical film studio, and that was the beginning of its success. But no studio, kind of whether a kind of quasi one like Marvel or a real one, has ever only made one genre of film. So you could say that some studios were specialists. Universal was specialists in horror. Warner was a specialist in crime and gangsters and kind of social stories. MGM musicals. But there is no studio. There's production companies like Dimension made horror, but there's no single studio that's just been like, we only know how to do one genre, but we're going to do that one genre really well. And I think Marvel is large enough now, and there's large enough presence within Disney that it's kind of got that kind of identity of a Warner Brothers and a Fox or whatever of old. I mean, virtually got that kind of, without having the same kind of years on the clock, obviously, but virtually got that kind of identity. And you wouldn't expect it to only make one genre either, and so it isn't.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. So we've been flirting around it, and we haven't actually gone full on into it because obviously this talking about breaking the mold and all that kind of stuff. She-Hulk. I quite liked as it went on week by week. I was saying to these guys when we was doing the episodes week by week, it almost seemed like they were doing they were writing it every week from the last week. Because everything that they were saying was basically what everybody else was saying about it.
It was incredible.
It was so well done. I thought it was really.
The first thing that made me think along those lines was when they said the thing about Wong. She said the thing about Wong being Twitter armor, and I kind of thought, how are you observing all this? Well, I think that's. I haven't actually looked into the sort of track record of the writers, but I think that is a combination of writers who maybe experienced those things in other shows.
Yep.
Maybe also talking to some people from the world of comics, the kind of people that Sean knows, who experience these kinds of, especially in terms of backlashes against woke, experience these kinds of things all the time. And then maybe possibly a bit of Feige, the Feige office kind of coming down and sort of saying, actually, we've taken a bit of flack over the last year or two for a couple of projects. But it was incredible. You're right, Andy. It felt like they were it really did feel like they were reacting to the reaction to the previous episode. Unbelievable.
There was the first time it really hit me was it the wedding episode? Because it was just after something really big had happened. I think that was when that I don't want to call them the wrecking crew, because that was, but then again,
Yeah.
looking back on,
Version,
but looking back on it now, I kind of don't care. But yeah, those guys, I think that was just when they tried to get her blood,
Yeah.
and then the following week, she kind of come out and was like, "Oh, you thought this was going to be some sort of big story? No, we're just going to go and have a wedding now." And you're like,
yeah.
"Oh, okay." So you
it was almost like, and again, this is the kind of thing they could design into it. They had to kind of, they had to create an illusion of reacting to the furore, but the furore was there, so that it seemed so authentic. But the kind of thing they could design in was this idea that she kept on getting her own show back on track. And that was almost her mission. So like her kind of arc, which actually she, I've watched a couple of the episodes twice, but I don't think I watched the first episode twice. I maybe need to watch it again, but I'm pretty sure that quite early on she does say, very early on, she sort of says, this is a legal show. And, it's about my life, and it's not going to be about my cousin and this and that. She may even come close to saying something like, this is not a superhero show. And so the kind of arc that she has is to stop the show deviating into cliche. And what was incredibly well designed about it was actually to have it go in the ways that the writers deemed silly and cliche would have been those things, but you would have bought it because it was authentic to the genre. And when you thought it was all going to be about a character, maybe the leader or somebody more significant than Todd Phelps. Todd Phelps, by the way, what a great slam on Joker. He's not my like at all. When you thought it was going to be about the blood, you would have totally bought it, because Marvel have done that several times, as she pointed out. So the smoke screen thing worked beautifully, and it was very, very interesting, all that kind of stuff. I mean, they really did. Some of the themes it touched on around social media and women and slut shaming and stuff like that, it was genuinely like, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why a lot of people didn't like it. I think you were always going to lose a part of that kind of mass audience and that kind of very superhero centric audience, and I think they realized that, and I think they accepted it. And I think it's one of those projects where they kind of said, we want to show this different side of this universe, and we also want to do our bit. I know you talked about representation a lot with Sean. We want to do our bit representational wise, and it made absolutely no preparation for Wakanda Forever, by the way, because I think if Wakanda Forever starts with a tone that is like the lingering end of She-Hulk, I'll be more flabbergasted than She-Hulk. But it was extremely clever, and even though there were some lulls in it, I thought the extra episode count meant that there was maybe one or two episodes that were not as vital as others. It was almost impossible not to be delighted by it at the end, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought that the way it ended was again just spot on, and I think it bookended that show. It tied that show up and delivered exactly like you said, her story. She was like, this is my story. And it wasn't typical. It was almost like they wasn't giving us what we wanted, but they did give us what we liked. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It was like the idea of the sort of red herring track was what you like normally.
Yeah.
And then the real underlying track was what you're going to like by the end of it. You're going to admire how they've done it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself is quite brave. And, the reason it won't maybe get the credit that it was a brave risk-taking show. I mean, I sent messages to everyone I know who I thought vaguely might watch it, saying this episode has just made my jaw drop, for the last one. And not many people came back, which means that a lot of people weren't watching it, that were watching everything else. And, you know, that kind of, it won't get credit maybe for being as brave as it was because it's a female-centric show where they kind of in some ways sidelined or made to look a bit less essential, the big male superhero star, you know, Hulk, and they kind of reinvented these characters who'd had a certain amount. I wasn't really sure I liked the Emil Blonsky reinvention early on. By the end, I kind of thought, yeah, you know what, he's kind of come over to this tone of the universe now.
So on that, actually, it was a point I wanted to bring up earlier, and I keep saying this, and I've said it a few times. We saw Matt Murdock, we saw Daredevil, Charlie Cox playing this character, and I remember Jarian's a bit of news that he plucked out 10, 11, 12 weeks ago before the show even started, saying that we would see a lighter side of Matt Murdock / Daredevil in She-Hulk, and I think I instantly got worried that we would lose the essence of what we'd seen in the Netflix shows of Daredevil. But then it kind of made me think, hold on a minute. It's like somebody coming into your house, isn't it? They will act what you give in your house. You know, the atmosphere in your house, they will act like that. And then if you went into their house, you would probably act like they act in their house. And it's the same with these characters. You know, Daredevil's come over to a She-Hulk show. He's not going to start being as brutal and as you know, as cutthroat as he is in his own show. And in the same way that if we saw She-Hulk in another show, she's not going to have all the control and be able to stop everything and just kind of change everything however she wants. She'll have to kind of go by their rules. And that's the same as what happens in a comic anyway, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking, you know, Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man, you know, you could buy completely, that was a massive shift. But you could buy completely that was the same Spider-Man that the things were happening to in the Spectacular Spider-Man that was being written by someone else and, you know, drawn by like maybe Sal Buscema or something. Style is so radically different. You know, you could kind of accept that. And yeah, the Daredevil use was interesting, wasn't it? I mean, again, I really liked how Sean just couldn't believe that people would care so much that he'd been seen in daylight. But it wasn't just he'd been seen in daylight. It was that he'd been seen in bright green grass.
Yeah.
And I actually think that was a bit of a gag. I think they kind of thought, wouldn't it be funny to put such a fish out of water? And there's a moment in that kind of scene where she has rewritten through the Kevin robot, she's rewritten kind of ending. There's a moment where Daredevil like lands,
Yeah.
get lost, and he actually looks like he has just come in from another part of the multiverse. I quite like, you know, again, it kind of, you know, those kinds of things can explain if you have to explain it to yourself. It's like, well, why is the Netflix Daredevil kind of suddenly appearing like this? You can sort of say, well, he was just plucked. He was plucked out of his world and then sort of dropped in here. But you know, it worked well enough for me. And I think, you know, it's more screen time for Daredevil and Charlie Cox. It's making him seem a lot more legitimate because a lot of people haven't seen the Netflix shows actually.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, people who watch the movies and you know, it kind of worked well, and yeah, just great to have him back really. And then that actor, I mean, I think a lot of people were really rooting for him to sort of make it across into the main universe, weren't they?
Mm-hmm. From the chat here, I just had a hilarious foreshadowing of Jen and Daredevil in the Daredevil show, repeatedly looking at the camera, frustrated because she can't break the fourth wall. Which would be funny to see that, you know, her just kind of like going, you know, like just throwing her hands up or making faces. But back on the Daredevil being in She-Hulk, they did sprinkle some elements of him in there. Like, you know, when he first walked into the courtroom, you kind of got his vibe from his tone from the Netflix series. That one fight scene in the lily pad in the hallway, the camera angle and the fight piece there, they sprinkled that in as well. So even though that he was in her house, they still did sprinkle a little bit of elements in there for familiarity.
They did the Daredevil music.
Fight, you knew. Sorry, guys.
No. I was just gonna say they did that Daredevil music, and back to what you were saying about the hallway fight. Like the hallway fight was awesome because like it gave us that like that feeling again of, you know, like this is not the same. It's not the same tone. I think it was blue versus like it being really dark the last time. So it's different, but it's similar. You know,
it's like that. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say even that had a great kind of character reference as well, because he approached it like that and fought all those guys and took them all out methodically. And then she walked through the wall. So I mean, it was it was, again, it sort of reinforced the characters and their difference and kind of, and of course, Jen is on screen a lot, not just She-Hulk, and in the small amounts of Daredevil we've had, Matt Murdock is not on screen as much, but when they had him interacting with her family at the end, you remembered that actually these characters are meant to have a human being underneath an identity that is fantastical, and the human being part of them would have to be normal to be in the company of other people and be recognized as such. And so you remember those moments. Whereas one of the good things about that, I mean, that we all could have loved the CG to be a bit better at certain times on the She-Hulk incarnation of Jen, but it was actually really good to kind of think about, the powered person who, it's not a disguise exactly. It's just a kind of a extension of parts of themselves, and it's not really a curse either. She kind of comes to a good place with it by the end, doesn't she?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure does. Something I want to touch on just before we close this one out, mine, and it's just it's going away from the genre thing really. He's obviously we've got Wakanda Forever in a couple of weeks, and we've got this. I guess you can call it a predicament, if you will, where we've got obviously the passing of Chadwick Boseman and the passing of T'Challa, and it looks to me like they're gonna. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? They're gonna honor T'Challa, but it would also be honoring Chadwick Boseman as well, which I think is a really interesting concept. And the only other time I can remember it happening, it's obviously happened a few times, I should imagine. The only time I can remember this happening in a similar way is with Glee. Do you remember the musical TV show and the Corey Teeth? I think he died of a drugs overdose actually, and they did the same in that show. They kind of honoured the character that he played, and all the other characters and actors and actresses within the show were obviously mourning the character in the show, but they were also mourning, in real life, they were mourning the person, human being.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that and how that can be done? How that can be portrayed on screen and how that might come across?
Well, I remember years ago having the conversation about, I suppose when the Infinity Saga was being signposted towards its ending, and people thought, because Downey Jr. had made a certain number of films, and so Chris Evans said, like, well, these guys are probably going out of the franchise. Will they just recast Iron Man? Will they have a legacy hero, which they're effectively going to do, aren't they, with Riri arriving? Will they kind of just reset and go back and have a young Iron Man, kind of like they did with Bond in Casino Royale? Although that was always very inconsistent because Judi Dench was there, so that was much more complicated. But and now actually, the more the time goes on, you can't really see them doing that. I kind of think obviously the multiverse allows for this. So if they ever get a guy who is physically close enough to Downey Jr. that a little bit of CG can basically turn it into a Downey Jr. performance, they can have a 30-year-old Downey Jr. possibly at some point in the future from the multiverse. But I don't think they're just going to kind of say, right, okay, well, let's do adventures from that set of Avengers in between the first film and the second film. I can't see them doing that now. It seems like it would be too much of a backward step. So I don't think that option was on the table. So I think I'm not sure if it's happened. I can't think of filmic examples of it happening, not with this kind of level of significance.
Well, they have brought in older actors in back and have used the aging tech, which I could see them using that for like Secret Wars with RDJ.
Not carrying on with the character, sort of thing. Like because the problem's been caused by a sort of sad reason. I can't think of examples of where they've kind of not carried on with the character. Yeah, I mean, Ryan Coogler, all the cast, the writers, Feige and everybody like that, they obviously thought the world of Chadwick Boseman. Again, the human beings, let's give them some credit. I think they probably said to themselves, is it a commercial move to not continue with T'Challa and recast? No, probably not. And I think they've gone, and we try to empower these artists to make these films they want to make. Coogler doesn't think we should have a T'Challa,
Well, it does seem like they've kind of relaxed that from coming out and saying before this film that we're never going to recast T'Challa, to sound like more like, well, now wasn't the time to do it. We want to do it this way. But it sounds like they're now, that door's been reopened to saying that they could possibly recast him in the future. I still think it's going to be a legacy type thing where instead of, Shuri or whoever's in this movie will be temporary. I'm still calling my shot and think there's going to be a child.
Mm.
That's how I think they're going to do it in the MCU. I don't think they're going to multiverse it. I don't think they're going to recast for a while. I can see it possibly multiverse it later. But I think their legacy in the MCU will be a child.
Yeah, I mean, having it be a child or just someone who was, early adolescence is kind of like the Spider-Man model, really, isn't
Yep.
it? It's like, people watch heroes grow into their kind of manhood. It's interesting that they, the title, every time I see the film promoed now, it just seems to be Wakanda Forever. It's really lost any kind of reference to Black Panther. And so it almost seems like this sub-franchise of the MCU is the Wakanda franchise now, not the Black Panther franchise. And I think that's very situational based on what happened to Boseman. But yeah, I think, I think we can all look forward to getting in that cinema and knowing that there's going to be something really sad about it. But like hearing that music and kind of, we've not really spent a lot of time in Wakanda since the first film. There's been Wakandan characters. It's been great to see Wakandan characters step into other things, but we've not really spent a lot of time in Wakanda. So I think it's going to be a real emotional thing. And I actually think the kind of the idea of the country and the idea of the symbolism of Wakanda that's always been built in its use in Marvel is going to be very strong, and it's going to take us a certain way, and then we'll just have to trust in the filmmakers and hope that they come up with something really good. It doesn't have to be, I would say, it doesn't have to be unbelievably good. I think they'll get a little bit of, in terms of reaction, I think they'll get a little bit of goodwill based on people miss Chadwick, and also people feel for the filmmakers who had to go on who clearly loved it. So I think it has to be good. I don't think it has to be unbelievable to sort of be an honourable kind of release. And I also, by the way, don't think it has to make anywhere near the amount of money that Black Panther made, because that was a massive surprise. And although it'd be fantastic to see it make that, and I do think there'll be a similar mobilization of some audiences who'll be like, right, church group are all going on. Sunday to watch it.
Yeah. So like I was telling you before. So two things. You're right about, we haven't seen much Wakanda. I think the most we've seen was Infinity War since Black Panther, and then a little bit in Falcon and the Winter Soldier with Bucky's deprogramming piece. But as far as I think this will make the same amount of money, if not more, only because the Latino culture with Tena Cuerta, where they're doing the Mayan, Talocan, all that kind of stuff. It's really, my wife is excited. She's Mexican. She is excited. She gets all excited. She's been showing me all of the TikToks, the Mexican TikToks, the Latin America ones, where people are just going crazy over Tena Cuerta and him playing this role of Namor in this film. So I think it's going to be as big culturally in Latin America as it was in the Black culture for the first film, for the second film.
I mean, it may well make more money, and that would be great. I just think it doesn't have to be judged a success, I suppose, is what I mean.
Yeah, I agree.
And I do think the audiences have got that kind of, they've just made Top Gun Maverick absolutely huge. So the audiences have got that kind of money in their pockets if the right film comes out. But, that's really interesting. I mean, and it shows, doesn't it, that it just proves against some of the things that you were talking about with Sean, that people really care if they get an in, if they're not usually represented in that way. I know it's complicated with Namor and his kind of heritage and comics and so on, but if they get an into a big film, it can really lift the big, a whole community, as the first film kind of demonstrated so fantastically. And yeah, it's going to be, I think it'll be significant. I suppose my point is it'll be significant film, whatever amount of money it makes.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think that's capped off our conversation really nicely there, guys. Unless anybody's got anything else that they want to bring up before we say good night or good afternoon, whichever.
No, it's been great as always. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Martin, for coming back on again.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
it's been
guys.
fantastic. Thank you, Ryan. Alex Jones, it's a pleasure as always. And fingers crossed, because now I'm definitely not coming back on until Thursday, that I'm going to get some sort of footage on Thursday at the London premiere.
Yeah.
And
Other time, don't
Sunday,
get arrested.
yeah,
yeah.
and Sunday we are doing Wakanda Forever preview. So
We are Wakanda Forever preview. Can't wait for that. Martin, it's been a pleasure. Alex, Joan, thank you very much. Anybody that's listening, I know Jamie's been there, Roxy's been there. So yeah, thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you again. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Why don't you tell them about the time we faced doom
All right. Well, as I remember,
at Avenger headquarters?